Welcome to the Roy Branson Legacy Sabbath School class. The Sabbath before Christmas, 2019. And we have a speaker today that has never spoken to us before, although they have attended on a regular basis. You've been coming from the very beginning or close to
Oh, just about 5 years since we came down to Loma.
Oh, okay. Where did you come from?
PUC.
PUC.
The Great North.
I'm trying to interview him here just a little bit.
Go ahead.
Okay, so Monte Butler, and this is your lovely wife. And your name is?
Lisa.
Lisa.
There you go.
And you both are from Northern California, or are you from here?
I grew up here.
Oh, okay, so you're back home, okay. And wait, Monte, you are here at the Loma Linda University. What is your capacity here?
Professor of Social Work and Social Ecology.
I'm going to be ignorant here. What's social ecology?
Well,
Or are we going to find out more?
no, I'm not going to get into that detail. Well, if you think about ecology and biology,
Yeah.
we talk about a social ecology because one of the things that distinguishes social workers from some of the other social sciences is the focus of our intervention is to see our individual, the individual or the client, within a social ecology. School, medical, family, all these different components of the ecology. So that's very important for our work with the individual. So that's where
And you're from where originally?
Central Valley.
Central Valley?
Central Valley.
Okay, well, anyway, I'm going to let you say you're going to talk more about yourself
Just a little bit,
and
yeah.
hit that. We're glad you. One of the nicest things about this young man is his braces. These are these Trafalgar?
Yes.
These are Trafalgar. These are the creme de la creme. So appreciate creme de la creme braces here, Monte. So let's just, and by the way, you've got some things here, and I'm sure you're going to explain about the phones, so let's just bow our heads. Gracious Father, we thank you for this day. We ask that you continue to watch over us, be with Monte in a very special way. We pray in your name. Amen.
Thank you. Does everyone who has a phone that they might use at least have the instruction sheets? Is there anyone that's using the texting feature? Because the texting, when you bring it up, you're going to be in a text conversation, so you'll get a response, and then my inclination was then to click on that response because it had a link, and you don't want to do that. Just stay in the conversation, and all you're going to let enter in is A, B, C, D, or E, and you send that, and you'll get a response, but then you're just entering in letters of multiple choice questions as your part of a text conversation. So
Is it better to use the other one?
the other one's better.
Oh, okay.
The questions will actually pop up on the screen and you just click the correct answer, so it duplicates. Well, good morning, everyone. Title of my presentation is Poverty and a Living Wage, Adding Things Up. And the reason I have adding things up is because my focus is going to be on the dollars and cents of poverty. There are a lot of different ways to approach that. But we're going to be talking about kind of the finance piece of that. This is what I hope to do this morning. We're going to take a brief course survey. I'll tell you a little bit about myself. I'll talk about what I hope to accomplish over the next 2 weeks. We'll talk about the definition of poverty, look at some responses or interventions that we've tried to implement both nationally and in California in response to poverty, and then talk a bit about the border between welfare and low-wage work, interaction or a boundary that's been of great interest to mine for quite a number of years. And then next week, we'll talk more about that border between welfare and low-wage work, draw some conclusions there, and then talk about a living wage in California. So if that's not what you want to hear about, you can just exit quietly out, or maybe you'll stomp out. All right, so let's take our class survey. And I'm willing to pause for a little bit if we have some people who still need to get going. Is there anyone?
Sorry, were there any instructions given as to what site to go to?
Yes, there, well,
I'm sorry.
right there. So if you've got, you want to open a browser, it actually works a little bit on a Droid phone, then a browser, and the address you're going to go to is polev.com oh, that's not a forward slash, that's a backslash, /, and then continue with MD, as in Dean, Butler. And that should open up a screen that tells you, just hold on, we'll get to you in just a moment. So if you've got a Droid phone, probably just going to Chrome and then up in the URL spot, type in that address. If you've got a...
Do you have a pen with ink in it?
That one has a little bit more.
Oh, wait, maybe
It is on there, step number
It's on
2.
the pink sheet.
Thank you.
On the pink-
And we're about ready to go, so I need to have you all signed in if we're going to make this work. And I'm interested in taking just a few minutes to get you in there. We are using the version where you don't have to sign up and become a user of the program. That takes me and my students about the first 30 minutes of the class usually. By the time we work out all the bugs. Okay. All right, let's try this out. So we've got 6 questions. First question, in the United States, a family of 3, for example, a mother and 2 children, is counted as poor if they have an income at or below which level? Trying to get a sense of how many responses I'm looking for. Got about half. I don't know how many. Anyone still trying to enter in but not in?
It's all right.
Okay, so while I'm aiming for at least 17, we'll move on. You should be able to join at any point. Second question. And you'll get some answers to most of these questions a little later on in the presentation. The federal minimum wage is? Actually, I forgot. After this question, I'm going to go backwards. Just do something like this. All right, we're up to 1920. For this one, let's go ahead, 21, that's good. I'm going to go ahead and lock this, and we'll actually show our responses. So, for this question, $7.25 an hour. So, our federal minimum wage, this is, we're at $7.25 is the answer for most people. Let's go back to our previous question. We'll go ahead and lock that one. We'll look at our responses to see. So that was poor. And the majority thought $984 per month. All right, let's go on to our next question. That's this one. What what is California's minimum wage for employees with 26 or more employees? It's just a classification, don't get thrown off by that. But there's actually two minimum wages.
Is the church a separate category?
Pardon?
Is the church a separate category?
No. Oh, and by the way, for those who have smartphones, it's not fair to look it up on your phone to answer the question. All right. So I can go ahead and close that one. Nor is it fair to copy your neighbor's response. $12 per hour is the primary response there. But spread out quite a bit. So in California, what is the minimum monthly CalWorks, that's welfare, plus CalFresh? Maximum, excuse me, what did I say, minimum? 0. In California, what is the maximum monthly CalWorks plus CalFresh, that's welfare and food stamps benefit a family of 3, for example, a mother and 2 children, can receive? So what's the maximum benefit that a family of 3 can receive under CalWorks and CalFresh? So the total between those two. Maximum benefit per month.
Gesundheit.
Up to 21. You're getting the hang of this. And show our response, and it's 2189. Our next question. Of all families receiving welfare benefits in California, the average number of children they have, that's per family. Three. And a living wage question. How much would it cost a San Bernardino County mother and 2 children, 1 in daycare, to purchase without government benefits or support a basic standard of living? Basic standard of living. So you've got several different rubrics there. Hourly wage, monthly income, and annual income. $23.38 is the most common. All right. We won't get to the answer, the actual answer to that question until next week, so you have to come back for that one. But the others we'll get to today. Gotta get you back here somehow. All right. Thank you. So, get this a starting point. For me on this topic, one of the things that I run into is a lot is just people have misperceptions of what's out there. So I wanted to get a sense of where people were. So just a little bit about myself. As I said, I grew up in the Central Valley of California. And then I went on, when I was a little bit older, attended Pacific Union College and earned a degree in interdisciplinary studies in 1988. I then went on to the University of Utah and earned a Master of Social Work degree in 1990. Went out and worked for a bit, returned to University of Utah to work on a PhD, and earned that in 2003. My work history as a social worker started out here at Loma University Church. I was on Bill Lovelace's pastoral staff. Bernard and I worked together back in the early 90s. And then I moved to Utah and worked for the Utah State Division of Aging and Adult Services, and then transferred to Adult Protective Services for the Salt Lake region, and then was pulled back to my alma mater, Pacific Union College, and I taught there for 18 years and held several administrative positions within my academic department while I was there. Then, about 5 years ago, came down here to Loma and have been teaching in the Department of Social Work and Social Ecology since. Primarily as a teacher and doing some research and helping out with admissions, that sort of stuff. It doesn't really tell you why I'm talking about the topic I'm talking about. My research now is in the area of Medicare, and that was a focus of my professional work. But while I was teaching at PUC, I'm a gerontologist, but I didn't teach gerontology, and I didn't do research in my area. I did research in areas of interest for students. So during that 18 years, the focus of my teaching and a lot of my work was volunteer, most of it being volunteer, was working with people who were experiencing poverty. And so that's the experience that I'm bringing to you today. So what is my goal for the next 2 weeks? As a Christian, I feel called to get my mind and heart into the world of people experiencing persistent poverty. But I find that this is quite difficult for me to do. And I notice that with people around me, they seem to be having a hard time doing that as well, because I see a lot of misperceptions. What I plan to do over the next few weeks is to walk us through definitions, research, and analysis. Not my research, some other people's research, that I hope will stimulate our imaginations and our understanding. So the federal poverty line is a set line in the income scale that is the same across the contiguous United States. It's a little bit higher in Hawaii, and then a little bit higher still in Alaska. But other than that, it's the same for everyone here in the contiguous states. Being at or below the income level or that line means that you are counted as being poor. Being above that income level or that line makes you not poor. The line was developed in 1964 by Molly Orshansky. She was an economist working for the Social Security Administration. And what she discovered when she started working on this is that line's pretty difficult to come by, that line. And it wasn't perfect then, she knew that, and it's not perfect today. The line that she developed is the same line that we use today. So why did she find it hard? Well, one of the first things that Orshansky found, in her words, she said there's no generally accepted standard for adequacy of essentials of living, except for food. So what she did is she decided to use the Department of Agriculture's economic food plan as a threshold for an adequate diet, and also use that as the foundation for her overall budget. So a little bit on the economic food plan. The economic food plan, and these are developed by the Department of Agriculture, is designed for temporary or emergency use when funds are low. They have 5 different food plans. This is the lowest one. And an economic food plan had about an even chance of providing fair or better diet for a family, but really only 1 chance in 10 of providing a good diet. So that's what we're basing this poverty level on. Her next step was to translate adequate food to an adequate total budget. To accomplish this, Orshansky used Ingalls' law, the idea that the proportion of a family's income allocated to food is an indicator of that family's economic well-being. A portion of food. So, for example, and maybe a little clearer with the example, if 2/3 of your income is spent on achieving adequate diet, your economic well-being is likely poor. Let's see how that would be. The standard Orshansky settled on was equal proportions. So 1/3 would go to purchasing food, an additional 1/3 would cover housing, and the final 1/3 would pay for everything else. And as I said before, that's the formula that we use today. So, what is considered poverty for a family of 1 parent and 2 children in 2017? And this family size and type, 1 parent, 2 children, is something we'll use throughout to be consistent, and I'm using 2017 because that's the year I have consistent and dependable numbers throughout, so we'll stick with 2017. So for a month in 2017, that economic food plan would cost $567. So again, a reminder, the economic food plan is designed for temporary or emergency use when funds are low. So that, and that works out to about $2.10 per person per meal. So that leaves us $567, or gives us $567 for shelter and $567 for everything else, for a total monthly budget, poverty budget of $1,701. So you underestimated the poverty line. It's actually quite a bit more than that. It was the second option. $1,701 for a family of 3 is the poverty line. If you have $1,702, you're not poor. Okay, you're not counted as poor. So let's put that in graphical terms and compare it to some of our responses to poverty. First, a little bit more about poverty in the United States. In 2007, 12.3% of the U.S. population, if we adjust for family size, 12.3% of the U.S. population met the criteria of living in poverty. That figure in California was just a little bit higher at 12.8% in 2017. A lot of times we look at what we sometimes call deep poverty, or 50% of the poverty level. That's $850 per month, so a little closer to what you guessed at there. And in 2017, 5.7% of the U.S. population, adjusting for family size, had incomes at 50% of the poverty level. Now I want to compare that poverty level to some other interventions we've had. We have the federal minimum wage of $7.25 per hour, or $1,160 per month. So the majority of you were right on with that. Just, I like having the bar chart so you can kind of see how things compare. The minimum wage in California was $10.50 per hour, or $1,680 a month in 2017. Now it's $12 an hour currently, and it's scheduled to go up to $15 an hour in 2023. And then there was welfare, CalWorks in California, and food stamps, which is CalFresh in California. California renames all its programs because we don't like going along with the rest of the country. We like adding our name to it, Cal on everything. In 2017, the maximum welfare benefit for our family of 3 was $704. And food stamps, that's just to get the per meal amount there, is $1.89 per person per meal, was $511 for a total budget of benefits, $1,215. That's the maximum benefit. The average for the state was about $200 less than that for what families have actually received. And just so you know, with those families that were receiving that amount, the average in 2017 for families, how many children did they have? They had 1.95 children. And as those who deal with statistics, you know we can't have 1.95 children.
On that diet, you can.
Yes, the diet. Well, I always told people that I feed my kids because I figured they'd last longer if I did. And I've been tracking that number for about 20 years, and it hardly moves over time. That's the number of children that families on welfare have in California. So I have many, many thoughts about this chart. When I'm done talking, eventually, I'm hoping to hear your thoughts on that chart. Right now, I want to make a transition from federal poverty line to the lived experiences in numbers, primarily, of single mothers near the federal poverty line. Welfare-reliant single mothers, and then those who are sometimes just on the other side of the poverty line or hovering right around it, low-wage, work-reliant single mothers. And this information is from a study, Making Ends Meet, How Single Mothers Survive Welfare and Low-Wage Work. It's one of my favorite, my all-time favorite social science research reports. And they published it in a paper and also in a book. It's one of my favorite books, I think. It's given me a lot of insight into people who were living right around the poverty line. The research was conducted by Catherine Eden, a sociologist, and Laura Lane, an anthropologist. The data for the survey was collected between 1988 and 1992, and this is really important because it was just prior to the 1996 Clinton-era welfare reform. So that was a time when welfare was still an entitlement. If you were poor enough, you could get it. Because of this, the movement from welfare to work was a decision recipients made rather than a forced choice resulting from benefit time limits that we have now in the post-welfare reform era. So it was a time where when we were learning from welfare recipients as well as work-reliant single mothers, we get a sense of why do they end up on one side of that equation rather than the other. It wasn't a forced choice, they were actually making choices around it. So we could learn from that. The purpose of the research, according to Eden and Lane, was to explore the full range of incentives and disincentives that low-skilled single mothers perceive and act upon when making the choice between welfare and work. A question that was often in my mind and I find is in the minds of many people. So a little bit more about their study. Participants in the study were from 4 cities, Chicago, Charleston, Boston, and San Antonio. Recruitment took place through personal introductions from community friends and organizations. You can imagine this was sensitive research. People don't like talking about their income and the money they spend and how they spend it. And so they used this method, and they also added a snowballing method as well. In addition, participating mothers introduced researchers to less connected mothers from their communities. Participants were 214 welfare-reliant single mothers and their 464 children. So that's an average of 2.4 children for those participants. And 165 low-wage work-reliant single mothers along with their 313 children, an average of 1.9 children per family. And Eden and Lane focused on working mothers who had similar wages to the wage histories of the welfare-reliant single mothers. And yes, the welfare-reliant single mothers did have work histories. On average, the welfare-reliant single mothers had 5.6 years of work history. What they found was Single mothers are often bouncing back and forth between the two. All right. To collect their data, Eden and Lane conducted multiple and intensive semi-structured interviews with each participant. To collect data on income and expenses, they started with monthly spending. What they found was with monthly, if you talk about someone about their income first, you tend to get a low ball, and then you talk about spending and they're gonna make their spending fit their income. They had discovered that in some earlier research. So they start with spending first. So that's what they did. They started with spending, then they collected information on income, including the sources of income, sensitive stuff. If income and expenses didn't match, and they often didn't, Eden and Lane dug deeper until they had enough income to account for all expenses. Eden and Lane also collected information on hardships experienced by families. Several specific hardships they tracked were food shortages and hunger, lack of medical care and health insurance, having utilities shut off, poor quality housing, shared housing, and dependence on public housing. So we wanted to get a sense of how hard was it to live in both of these conditions, people to compare that. So let's talk about the welfare-reliant single mothers first. Average expenses for welfare-reliant mothers adjusted for 2017 dollars, because remember this took place back in the late 80s, 1980s and 90s, so I adjusted that. For 2017 dollars, their average expenses were $1,890 per month. So just a reminder, in 2017, federal poverty line was $1,701, very close to their expenses. Housing accounted for $460 of the total, food $566, other necessities $726, and non-essentials, things like eating out, cable TV, entertainment, lottery tickets, cigarettes, alcohol, accounted for 138 of their total budgets. Their average benefit of income was $1,220 per month. So an average shortfall between expenses and benefit payments was $670. Only one of the welfare-reliant mothers was living, only one of all that they surveyed, only one was living on their welfare income benefits alone. And in the words of Eden and Lane, this mother went without, or the child of this mother went without food and adequate clothing on a regular basis, and the mother was in danger of losing custody of her child due to neglect at the time they were interviewed. So how did the welfare-reliant mothers make up the difference? Well, 46% used work strategies in the form of work reported for taxes and to their welfare workers, because if they're receiving aid, they have to report their work, they're supposed to. Unreported work and underground work. And by underground work, we're talking about selling sex, drugs, and stolen goods. And Eden and Lane found that about 8% of that group were involved in underground work. For an average of $276 per month of additional income to help fill the gap. 77% used network strategies, family, absent fathers, boyfriends for $339 additional dollars, and 31% used community group agency strategies like food pantries for an additional $80. So that's how they made up the difference. A little bit on hardships for the welfare-reliant single mothers. They ran out of food or were hungry, could not afford needed doctor visits, had their utility shut off, experienced multiple housing quality problems, depended on public housing, shared housing with another family, were evicted or became homeless, lacked needed winter clothes, had their phone service cut off, or had no phone at all. Just a list of the kinds of things they experienced. And then Eden and Lane kept track of how much they experienced those different, what hardships they experienced and to what extent they experienced those. So now let's switch over to the low-wage, work-reliant single mothers with their average expenses adjusted for $2,017. That was about $2,685 per month, or $795 more than the welfare-reliant mother. So I give you the relationship there on the end. And housing accounted for $737 for a total of the total expenses. Food, $538. Other necessities, $1,229, and non-essentials, $181. Their average wages were $1,687 per month for a shortfall of $1,007. None, so that's 0, of the low-wage work-reliant mothers lived on their work alone. So how did they make up the difference? 39% used work strategies for an average of $190 per month. 82 used network strategies for $339 per month, and 22% used community group and agency strategies for $80 on average per month. And then, I believe this is my last slide, what was their hardship like? Their hardship was 1.5 times greater than the hardships experienced by welfare-reliant single mothers and their families. Key factor in this greater hardship was that they often lacked health insurance. And so 1.5 times greater, but that was actually reduced because of the fact that the lack of health insurance was, in calculating the overall hardship, was actually countered by the fact that they often had better housing than the work-reliant mothers, single mothers. They tended to put their eggs in that basket, the work-reliant single mothers, because they knew if they spent more on housing, that might get them into a better neighborhood, which would also give them better schools for their kids. So next week, I'll talk a little bit more about the conclusions that Eden and Lane drew from this, as well as talk about our living wage. But now I'm interested in your comments, conclusions, and questions.
Well, let's go to Peter first.
He didn't even have to raise his hand, or did he?
Well, a comment and 2 quick questions. All the statistics that you put up for us are very good because, in my view, it's helping the federal government, the state governments, and the local governments how to plan the distribution of the resources that are available.
If they based them on research, that would be true.
Yes, that's a good thing, and you did a great job. Now, 2 quick questions. The first one, what do you think it's if the poverty is the main problem for the Church of Christ? That's one question. If the poverty is the main problem for the Church of Christ.
The Church of Christ?
Yeah, how to tackle the poverty? Is this the main problem for the church? For the Christian church?
I think it's a main thing, a key thing that we're called to do. And so I think if we neglect it, we're neglecting a key call that we have as Christians.
Do you see poverty as
and for me, it's my primary focus of my call as a Christian.
Do you see poverty as a cause or as a symptom of this cause?
Poverty, I see poverty more as a symptom
As
of
a symptom.
other things.
And can we solve the problem of poverty before we attack the cause of the symptom?
You know, I think we need to work on causes.
Then the cause is the most important, right?
I think so.
Okay. Because no matter how much we attack all these symptoms, we are not going ever to solve the problem, right?
I think that's right. And then the question is, how much suffering and hardship are we willing to tolerate while we're working on the causes? And so that's a key issue for me as well. Because for me, it's not a, let's work on the problem and not worry about the results of the problem, because there's so much suffering and hardship that happen along the way. We need to deal with that while we're working on the causes.
And the second question,
Oh, I thought that was your second question. Go ahead. I want your second question, believe me.
well, I said from the beginning that I have two questions.
Yeah, I understand. I misunderstood your first question as having multiple parts.
Yeah.
I'm a teacher, I know about that.
The problem of poverty was the first question.
All right.
And the second question is very popular these days for the left in this country to talk a lot about the redistribution of goods.
Yes.
What is your position in this regard?
Well, I'm not, this is kind of apart from solutions, but I do think that the distribution of goods is very unequal in our society, extremely unequal, and I think that lack of more equal distribution is a key part of our problem. There's actually research that's out there that it's not only a problem for the people at the low end, but even people at the very high end. Studies that have been done around the world that show that health is worse for everyone on the income ladder in nations where the income distribution is much greater. There are some interesting dynamics, we don't have time to get into there, but it's a problem for all of us. But as we know, many of us sitting in this room, the hardships are much greater for those people at the very bottom of the ladder.
Is the redistribution of goods a biblical
That's a second
concept?
question. I'm a teacher. See, I know that's an additional question. Go ahead.
Is the redistribution of goods a biblical concept?
Actually, I think there kind of is. When you think of Jubilee, there's one idea, the giving off, doing away with debts. It's a big piece of redistribution.
You know, I'm going to suggest we take questions from one side of the room first, so the camera doesn't keep sweeping back and forth. So we'll take as many questions from that side as we can, then we'll come over here.
It's been a problem which I've thought about for a really long time, about how, as a Christian, I should respond to the poverty around me. And I lived in New York for 45 years, so I used the subways, and there was lots of begging by poor people all the time. And it didn't matter what I did, I felt bad. If I gave money, I was wondering whether I was feeding a drug habit or something like that. If I didn't give money, I felt bad for obvious reasons. So I'm just wondering if you've thought about this. I ended up feeling that it wasn't for me to judge how they were going to use the money. So I gave, but that took a long time. So I still ponder and worry about that topic. Now I'm here and I drive cars and I don't see that poverty. So I guess the fear is that we'll forget it.
A little bit more out of sight, out of mind, which happens a lot. Couple things on that. And I think, again, we have two tracks here. One is, how do we respond to individuals who are asking for money, which is often a key focus because it faces us. I think one thing we need to remember is there's a much larger system, the welfare system I was talking about, minimum wage, policies upon policies that affect people. And we need to be active in that as well. I think that's the primary thing, because that gets back to causes I'm talking about, our economic system. So I think that's most important. But then there's, how are we going to deal with it? And I think that's important too, because it does affect people and their hardships, and it's most personal to us, even though that's kind of the least important part. How bad do we feel about it? But I experience what you do. I'll tell you my personal approach to that, and that is, if I'm going to give something to someone, I usually give them food. So if I see someone and I want to help them, I'll take them into a food joint and I'll buy them a meal or a meal for their family. So when I'm accosted in a parking lot, most of the time I say not today. That's my general response. Occasionally I don't say that, and when I don't say that, I take someone in and I'll spend a lot more money on food for them than I would ever hand over to them. Okay. My second response is that I'm a heavy contributor to programs to serve the poor in my local community. Up in England, I actually developed and ran an agency that did that as a volunteer. Here, as soon as we came to Loma Linda, I researched the different organizations in the area and decided which one am I going to help. And I'm helping them financially right now. At some point, maybe get involved with them voluntarily. But to me, it's not an out just to let other people do it. But there are good programs, and they can serve, and I've worked in those programs before, so I'm an advocate of support those programs who can then help people, and they've got a whole network for doing it much more efficient. Yes.
A very quick comment on the redistribution of wealth. Matthew 19, verses 20 and 21. All these things I've kept, the young man said. What do I still lack? Jesus answered, if you want to be perfect, go sell your possessions and give to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me.
An example.
Thank you.
Jerry?
I'm guessing that you have thought about this issue relative to other relatively wealthy countries in the world. Do you have any examples of who you think does it better than we do? I think we're all aware of the rather extreme difference that we have in wealth and poverty in this country. Who does it better, and how do they get at the causes?
It's a huge topic. So I'm going to just take one piece of it. And I would say that one of the key limits on people's freedom, whether it's a single mother who's relying on welfare in that transition to work, one of the key barriers is health care. And when they are receiving their welfare, they have, in our country, they have health care for their children. And they're very reluctant. Well, now we force them off. But before we forced them off, they were very reluctant to go to work where they wouldn't receive health care because they were concerned about their children. So I would say one of the key interventions, if you want to think about other countries that don't handle health care the way that we do. There are a number of those, and I think that's a huge barrier that's removed from the equation.
Who's over there? Who had their hand up over there?
Okay, the first one on this side of the room is Michael Schofield.
This seems like a very heavy topic. It's a messy topic. It's really complex. How are we going to do it in 2 weeks? And there are a lot of prejudices to it. For example, and my impulse is to apply root cause analysis to the poverty, but you'd have to do that distinctly in each individual case because each case is different, so then you're only going to have some averages of the various causal factors, and that's messy. But I noticed that you assumed that if a single mother could find work, that she would get 40 hours a week, and that isn't always the case.
It's not always the case, nor are they going to have consistent work because the low-wage workers are the workers who tend to have not full-time work. They also tend to be doing work where if there are orders, they work. If they don't have orders, they don't work. So it's
Or piecework.
Piecework. Yes, you're right.
Or seasonality, seasonal work. So there's some terrific variables there. So this is a big topic. How are we going to do it in 2 weeks?
Well, we probably won't. I do want to say one thing. It's a phrase that I use, Michael, and it's, and I'm a very strong believer in work. Some people might, most people wouldn't disagree with me. That I expect adults to work. but not everyone can, but this is my caveat on that. If a person works for a living, they should be able to earn a living. If you want my takeaway from that, I think we should expect people to work. But if a person works for a living, they need to be able to earn a living. And that's one of the things that then leads to my topic for next week.
Okay, Henry, and then Graham.
Well, this is a statement and a question, but I listened to a lecture by John Meacham about, who has written a lot about American editor of Newsweek for a while. And he said the problem we haven't solved in our country now in terms of economics is globalization. And that there isn't, this is my idea, I haven't heard a good method or a good mechanism for raising wages of people who are working in unskilled positions, because the pressure and a key part of our system is you maximize production and minimize production costs. So there are all kinds of incentives to keep wages low. But is there a way is there another way to do it other than minimum wage laws? I think a reasonable person can't just say, if we just cut taxes and regulations, we'll bring the people that are working for minimum wage up, because the economic incentives are going the other way. That's a comment, but a question. Are there other models?
Well, I'm providing some of the things that people spend their money on. That's one of the things. It is complicated. I think one of the things when we think about root causes, we need to think back to, there are many levels to that, and sometimes there's a long history of that. So you talked about international trade and economics. Well, why do we do that? Because we want cheaper goods, and we want more goods. So that part of it's coming back to the root cause of why do we have these situations? Because of I want, we want. And we could choose as a country to not do so much of that, but it would cost us more. We make that choice has economic repercussions for people in our society. Some benefit from it, and others are hurt by it. Those are choices we make. We weren't forced, it wasn't a forced decision. And then that ripples through the whole economics of wages and all that. And yeah, I'll stop. Great.
Thank you for your presentation. I'm a mad keen family history sort of buff, and when I look at my family history, every now and then, 150, 180 years back, when the family got into trouble, they were put in workhouses. And a big slice of the workhouse regime was religion. That almost they were required to go to prayers and church and so on. Even coming further forward, one of our family, part of our family history, my wife's side of the family, I might add, just to sort of keep it, got into some difficulty in Kurrambong, and even our church leader suggested, when talking about family in a letter that was written to them, that their poverty was a result of a character flaw. It seems to me that, and here's the question, and you can comment, it seems to me that when the church gets involved in the issue of poverty, or when it did, there were two extremes, as in most things. Either one extreme is, let's do whatever we can and let's forget the moralizing and the reasoning and just help because people need to eat. And on the other end, there's a great need to moralize and to sort of, if we fix the moral deficiency, somehow or other the poverty will disappear. And I think I smell that in 2020 around the place. People suggesting that it's at its base, it's a moral issue. Do you find those things still lingering, those attitudes?
Those attitudes?
Yes.
Through and through. It hasn't changed. That's where we've had that through time, and it still persists. And the reality is, some people are poor because they've made very bad choices. Just like some of my